'Twas hard our parting, mother dear, it gave you untold pain, but hope was strong within our hearts that we should meet again. There's health upon my cheek once more, and in my eye new light. 'Twill all be quenched in ocean's gloom, for Lizzie dies tonight. That was the first verse of a song written by Stephen Foster. The somewhat morbid title, Lizzie Dies Tonight, matches the final entry of a diary which was found in the wreckage of a passenger ship off the Nova Scotian coastline in the year 1860. For Maritime Mishaps, we are exploring the short-lived existence of the SS Hungarian and its disastrous end off the coast of Cape Sable, including the deaths of all 205 people on board. This tragic tale begins with the Allen shipping line, founded in 1819 by the Scot Captain Alexander Allen. Trading and transporting cargo, passengers and mail between Scotland and Montreal, the company quickly grew, and in 1854 they launched the Montreal Ocean Steamship Company as part of the Allen Line. Just 2 years later, they would go on to take over a major contract for the Royal Mail from one of their main rivals of the time, Cunard. Our ship in question, the SS Hungarian, will be built as part of the Allen Line in 1859 at the William Denny and Brothers shipyard in Dumbarton, Scotland. The ship was a passenger steamer with a length of just under 91 metres, or around 300 feet long, and weighing 2,187 tons. Constructed from steel, she was powered by a 400 horsepower direct-acting steam engine that drove a single-screw propeller able to reach top speeds of 10 knots. Being a cutting-edge passenger ship of the day, the ship had the capacity to carry 150 passengers in first class and 300 in second class. The Hungarian transported passengers, cargo and mail from Liverpool in the UK to Quebec and Montreal in Canada, a journey that typically took the vessel around 9 days to complete, with her maiden voyage setting sail on May 18th, 1859. The SS Hungarian was truly an impressive ship. At the time, it was valued at £40,000, which in today's currency is just over 6.2 million English pounds. But despite all this, the SS Hungarian would not lead a long life, eventually meeting its fate just 9 months after its construction, in the year 1860. A typical voyage for the Hungarian involved sailing between Liverpool, England, and Montreal, Canada, carrying its cargo of passengers and mail. It was on one such journey that the SS Hungarian actually took part in the rescue efforts of another ship. On a frigid morning on the 9th of November, 1859, the SS Hungarian was sailing off the edge of the Newfoundland banks. The weather that morning was particularly chill, with a northerly gale blowing, leading to choppy high seas. It was around 8 AM that the Hungarian sighted another vessel in distress, struggling in the rough conditions, and the crew aboard the Hungarian decided it was time for them to take action. A crew of 7 men was put together, including Chief Officer William H. Hardy and Third Officer Richard Porter. They were lowered into a life raft and crossed the waters until they were in hailing range of the other ship. There they were told it was the British schooner, the John Martin. As the dominoes of fate would have it, the John Martin itself was in fact carrying the rescued crew of another ship that had similarly been wrecked off of Labrador. The John Martin was beginning to take on water, and with its inevitable demise hanging in the air, the crew had to act quickly. Making return trips with their lifeboat, the full complement of the John Martin, which consisted of 43 lives, including that of 23 women and children, managed to abandon their sinking vessel and were helped aboard the Hungarian. However, it was during this procedure that things took an alarming turn, with Chief Officer Hardy being knocked overboard while helping the other passengers onto the Hungarian. Not only did the seamen have to contend with the icy cold ocean waves, but it was a known fact that despite being a devoted man to a life at sea, William Hardy could in fact not swim. Through some quick thinking by the other members of the crew, a rope was tossed out to the chief officer, who, in spite of the panic, managed to grab hold and proceeded to haul himself back aboard the boat. The next day, on the morning of November 10th, the Hungarian arrived at St. John's. With the crew and passengers of the John Martin safely back on land, the crew of the Hungarian was celebrated as heroes, with each member who had helped in the lifeboat being awarded a silver cup in honour of their quick action and heroism. On February 8th, 1860, the SS Hungarian set out from Liverpool, making a routine stop at Queenstown Island, now known as Cobb. The following day, on the 9th of February, the Hungarian began its journey across the Atlantic Ocean to the United States, bound for Portland, Maine. This was a routine journey, like one of many others that the passenger steamer had made before, and in fact, for the first 10 days of sailing, everything was going according to plan. Under the command of Captain Thomas Jones, the Hungarian had around 205 people on board, with 88 of those being crew members. This included William Hardy and Richard Porter, returning as first and third officers respectively. There were also several notable passengers on board, such as Marcus Talbot, a member of the Ontario Parliament, as well as his wife. The ship was also carrying their standard load of cargo, including their charge of deliveries for the Royal Mail. It was on the evening of the 19th of February that things took a dramatic turn for the worse. The Hungarian was sailing along the Nova Scotian coastline, with the mainland in sight, when the ship found itself caught in a terrible winter blizzard. Just off Cape Ledge, on the west coast of Cape Sable, the Hungarian was tossed and battered by strong, violent winds and by rough seas. Struggling to keep control of the vessel, the storm took hold of them, pushing the ship towards the cliffs known as the Great Rip. It is likely that the underside of the ship was torn apart by jagged rocks found beneath the surf, and eventually the ship ran aground, becoming beached just 2 miles from the island of Cape Sable. Despite being within sight of the shoreline, the Hungarian was left stranded, continuing to be battered by the weather and the waves. Residents of the island had spotted the wreck, but they were unable to aid the sinking ship due to the conditions of the heavy seas and the wind which the blizzard had brought. At 3 o'clock in the morning of February 20th, those on the shore could still see lights aboard the ship, and it is said that the masts, which were by now jutting out of the waves, featured survivors desperately clinging onto them in a last hope of survival. But by 10 o'clock in the morning, the ship had fully sunk beneath the waves, taking with it all lives on board. The following telegram was sent out from Cape Sable to Cunard & Co. regarding the Hungarian's final moments. Quote, "A steamer's lights were seen on Monday morning at 3 o'clock on Cape Ledge. At daylight, spars and smoke pipe only were standing. At 10 o'clock, all was gone by the board, and the vessel settled fast. A heavy sea was running, breaking mast high over the ship. Communication with the ship was impossible. All on board were lost, unless boats left the ship before daylight, which is not likely. At low water, part of the vessel is still visible." It can be difficult to put ourselves in the shoes of those on the shoreline at 3 in the morning, standing by to watch the demise of this sinking ship. Surely there must have been something they could have done. After all, the Hungarian was only 2 miles away from where they were standing. However, as with the untimely ends of many sailors, it can be easy to underestimate the unforgiving wrath of a surging sea. In the book The Old Chairmaker by Evelyn M. Richardson, dated 1947, she talks about the wreck of the Hungarian and describes the area of the sea off of Cape Sable as the horse race. Quote, "The horse race is one of the cruel-toothed traps that run seaward from the Cape, and the wild white horses that seldom cease to toss their ragged manes and thunder shoreward are the huge Atlantic breakers that swing in around the sandy cape." End quote. Isn't this such a fantastically poetic way to describe the fearsome power of nature that the seas can hold? That just off the Cape, the waves were rampaging like a wild group of stampeding white horses. I think this helps us to understand how no rescue efforts in lifeboats could have possibly been made, with those looking on from the shoreline feeling just as tragically helpless as those on board the sinking ship. As Richardson then goes on to say, quote, "She struck in the early hours of a wild February morning, and in the bleak dawn the helpless men on shore could discern the trapped steamship some distance from the beach. Her foremast had apparently gone by the board when she struck, but the main and the mizzen were still standing. Yards and rigging were black with people. No small boat could live in the seething water between the shore and where the doomed ship lay." End quote. Over the course of the following days, the flotsam remains of the Hungarian were washed upon the shores, and it wasn't long before the true toll of the wreck became evident, with the waves beginning to bring in personal effects, cargo, and bodies ashore. The bodies were taken and buried in local cemeteries, and a lot of the debris was ruined beyond use or recognition. Notably though, among the washed up remains included 6 sacks of waterlogged mail, a passenger's ticket bearing the name Ellen Sheehan, and that abandoned diary with the final morbid entry, "Lizzie Dies Tonight." In the end, not a single person aboard the SS Hungarian survived the wreckage. It could be argued that some other circumstances may have led up to the ship becoming wrecked upon the coast, with no one being left alive to give a tale of what actually happened aboard the ship over its final 48 hours. However, the sailors on board were known, competent seamen, with the newspaper The Liverpool Mercury giving the late Captain Thomas Jones a glowing review. Quote, "Captain Jones was well known in the service as an able and experienced seaman. It is somewhat remarkable that during a pretty long lifetime he never met with an accident at sea until this deplorable occurrence took place. He was, however, frequently instrumental in saving lives." End quote. The paper then goes on to showcase 2 separate occasions of Captain Jones' heroic deeds. In the end, it took 6 days for the storm to abate so that boats could sail out to the wreckage, but by that time it was far too late, with the seas having claimed the remains of the ship and all those on board. News of the disaster spread rapidly on both sides of the Atlantic, with reports highlighting the total loss of life and the harrowing circumstances of the wreck. This tragedy underscores the perilous nature of transatlantic travel during this era. However, it would not be the only wreck that would impact the Allen line of shipping vessels. Along with the SS Hungarian, 3 other sister ships were also made, the Nova Scotian, North Britain, and the Bohemian. While the Hungarian certainly had the most catastrophic end, one identical sister ship, the Bohemian, would also sink 4 years later in 1864 off Cape Elizabeth, Maine, in an incident that would cost the lives of 20 souls on board. Not only that, but the disaster of the Hungarian was not the first Allen Line ship to be making headlines. A year before the sinking of the Hungarian, another passenger steamship, the Indian, had sunk off of Cape Race, Newfoundland, leading to the loss of 27 lives. This of course would lead to a major negative light being cast on the Allen Line Shipping Company from both British and Canadian press, after the tragic sinking of the Hungarian denoted their second steamer to be lost in less than a year. But despite the various tragedies that had befallen the Allen Line of shipping vessels, by the 1880s this company would go on to become the largest privately owned shipping concern in the world, eventually being purchased by Canadian Pacific Steamships in 1917. The island of Cape Sable was already notorious for shipwrecks by the time of the Hungarian sinking in 1860. In fact, shipwrecks had been common in this area for almost 200 years, since 1676. Petitions had been made for a long time for a lighthouse to be built, to warn ships of the dangerous coastline. But it wasn't until the disastrous end of the Hungarian that the Canadian government took action. In November 1861, the first Cape Sable light was constructed, with a steam whistle fog alarm being added in 1876. Since then, there have been other ships which have run aground in the foggy, rough seas, but the loss of life has been significantly reduced. In the 1980s, the running of the lighthouse was automated and the keeper's house demolished, with the island now being completely uninhabited, except by a small population of sheep. Today, the Cape Light is Nova Scotia's tallest lighthouse, standing at 101 feet tall. With this, along with modern technology ever increasing the safety of modern shipping vessels, we can hope that the tragic tale of the Hungarian is one that won't ever be repeated along the Nova Scotian coastline.